going to move on to cybersecurity, something that I think is absolutely critical at the moment. And we want to share a little bit around what New Zealand business leaders really need to know. And I guess as the number of ransomware attacks occur, and cybersecurity is becoming more important than it ever has been for business leaders in New Zealand, and understanding the trends and what's happening in the space is really critical for not only business leaders but boards in terms of how you minimise operational damage and reputational damage. So joining us today, I'm really excited. We've got Alex Tay, CEO of ChiliSoft, cybersecurity specialist distributor, and Michael Wollensberger, cybersecurity consultant and partner in CISO at ClearPoint. Welcome.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, welcome. Alex, maybe you want to start off and share a little bit around your experience in the cybersecurity industry.
Sure. My journey actually started 25 years ago. We had a startup in London, in the UK, and grew that business to around 50 staff, and sold that company in 2016. And I've spent the last 6-7 years in New Zealand building up an organisation called ChiliSoft. And we started our journey 20 odd years ago as the key supplier for an endpoint security product called ESET, which we've now developed that business into a multi-Gartner leading solution provider for all aspects of cybersecurity.
Fantastic, fantastic. Michael, how about yourself? Share a little bit around your background.
Sure. I've been in security probably for the last 20 years, basically most of my career. I started out in IT as an engineer, but very quickly was attracted to the hard problem of cybersecurity, and I spent a lot of time in banking at the ASB and some consulting and architecture roles, and I've done 2 tours of duty as a Chief Information Security Officer, one at Air New Zealand, and I've consulted widely with a range of other organisations as well. So yeah, I've been doing this a long time.
Got some very experienced gentlemen here to talk to you about cybersecurity, and I'm excited about these topics. So maybe just to kind of get things rolling, Alex, maybe I'll sort of start with you, but be keen to sort of understand what are some of the emerging technologies that we're seeing in the cybersecurity space, technologies and solutions, I guess.
Yeah, there's 3 key areas I thought I'd bring up around this area. First, essentially, it's widely known that AI and machine learning has been used in cybersecurity for a long time. But more recently, we've seen more development around automation and the ability to use automation to remediate quickly, which I think is really, really essential. And then we've also seen an emergence of the concept of working from anywhere securely, security and network by design. So advancement in what Gartner calls Security Service Edge, SSE, has become very, very popular. And then lastly, the endpoint security market has really developed into endpoint detection and response, and now hence further developed into what we call XDR, which is an emergence of analytics tools that can help organizations detect breach quickly, and then using automation to remediate even at 2 a.m. in the morning on a Sunday. Yeah,
fantastic. What about you, Michael?
Yeah, maybe to pick up on a couple of those examples, I think the example of Zero Trust or the Secure Service Edge is a really good one. It's not a new idea. The ideas architecturally have been around for more than 10 years in papers from Forrester and from Google. But really what's emerged, I think, in the last few years is that those architectures, those ideas have been incorporated into products that customers can easily buy and deploy. So the idea has gone from being theoretical to something that all types of businesses can feasibly deploy. Along with that, I think there's a trend in some of the, particularly in those managed detection and response products, where you're seeing solution vendors are providing a software product and a platform, a cloud platform, but they're also providing human services behind that. And one of the problems we have in cybersecurity is there's just not enough very experienced people to go around. So customers are often, buying solutions, but they're getting some of that human effort behind it as well. And probably the one to add, I think, which is really coming to maturity now, is what we call passwordless authentication. It's been long promised that the password would be dead. It hasn't happened. What we're starting to see is a lot of the major vendors are making it much easier for us to log on using security keys or devices or mobile phones. So I think that one's really emerging as a game changer.
Yeah, fantastic. Maybe just maybe moving on a little bit here in terms of now business and business risk. Michael, just continue with you. What risk does cybersecurity play in business in general?
Yeah, I think probably the first thing to understand is that the cybersecurity risk relates to your business. So it depends what your business does and what value you've got in that business, both to you as a business owner and also to your stakeholders. So if you do something important in your business and you use computers, there's probably an element of cybersecurity risk. And there's a really big difference between, say, the corner dairy and a hospital. If the dairy is closed for a day, I have to go down the road to buy my groceries, it's not a big impact. But if a hospital is closed and I need urgent treatment, that's really serious. So I think when we're thinking about risk as as business stakeholders, we have to really think about that. What have we got to lose in our business, and what's the impact on our stakeholders? And our measures to manage cybersecurity risk should really match up with that value that we've got at risk.
Yeah. Look, just to add to that, we are in New Zealand. Most New Zealand organisations don't have an unlimited budget and don't have unlimited resources. Managing risk and budget is always, the job of a CISO. And the important thing that the CISO needs to do is actually taking our boards on a journey, educating them on the fact that there's no silver bullet in cybersecurity, and actually it's continuous improvements over time that's going to get them to where they need to be.
Yeah, okay. So I guess just continuing on a little bit there in terms of businesses and New Zealand business leaders, what is it that they really need to start to worry about when it comes to information security?
Look, it's widely acknowledged that after a security breach, an organisation actually loses 25% of their customers. That's a lot of customers to take into consideration. In my opinion, my humble opinion, we certainly don't have enough compliance with teeth behind our industry. If you look at the UK and you look at GDPR and you look at Australian mandatory disclosure, those companies in those regions are being held by audits around their compliance and also being fined significant amounts of money for being non-compliant or negligent. I think we are behind in New Zealand, to be honest. We've recently updated our Data Protection Act, but yet we don't have enough people to police this.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree with that more. I think New Zealand is very lightly regulated, which is a great advantage on the one hand, but it really puts that responsibility back on business leaders and technology leaders to be thinking about risk from their own perspective. If you're just following the rules, there's a very good chance you're going to be exposing yourself to risks that you're not comfortable with. And increasingly, I think we're going to see New Zealand businesses that trade overseas finding that their customers' expectations overseas and the regulation they face overseas is going to be a much higher bar than we have in New Zealand. So it's really important to be sort of looking through, I guess, what's the regulatory minimum in New Zealand to what are our customers and our other regulators expecting of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we'll just take a look at, there's some massive geopolitical issues going on around the world at the moment. We've got the war in Ukraine, which is just, a terrible thing that's happening. I'd like to really understand, what are your guys' view in terms of, the impact of these sort of wars further afield outside of New Zealand? What's the impact of the security threats here in New Zealand, actually?
It's a really interesting question. It's hard to say definitively what impact the war in Ukraine has had on New Zealand, but the sense I get is that, at least initially, there was a lot of focus on between Russia and Ukraine. So if anything, things may be quieting down in our region. I wouldn't necessarily expect that to continue to be the case, and we've seen a lot of activity in Australia in the last couple of months, and the Australian Federal Police came out and said that one of the major breaches there was Russian cyber criminal gangs. We've seen that. But there's some really important lessons to take from the conflict between Russia and Ukraine and the way cyber's played into that. And the head of the UK National Cybersecurity Centre recently gave a speech and outlined how there had been a serious cyber dimension to that conflict, but that Ukraine had managed to defend itself well, and in fact Russia's objectives with cyber weren't achieved. That's a really important lesson for us to take, because often stakeholders either don't believe in the cybersecurity problem, they don't believe there's a risk, or more often they're a bit defeatist about it doesn't matter what I do, I'm going to get hacked anyway. think the lesson we can take from Ukraine is that defence is possible. There was a lot of industry support and a lot of support from allied governments to help Ukraine, but Ukraine also had a really good professional cyber defence. So, it's worth investing in building our cyber defences, I think, is a lesson to take from that.
Yep.
Yeah, I've done a lot of deep diving into this particular topic. One of the things I will point out is that there is a massive cyber war going on in this area, and you can look at just two of the most famous groups in this war: Anonymous on the western side and the Conti ransomware group. It was interesting to me that just before the war kicked off, the Conti ransomware group actually splintered, and there was a Ukrainian and a Russian division for Conti ransomware. And what actually happened was the Russians said, we're going to attack Ukraine, and the Ukrainians took objection to that, obviously. And they actually ousted the Russians by posting an internal chat room with the location of a crypto wallet with $720 million. That crypto wallet has obviously now been monitored by the CIA, the FBI. It's dead money, right? So many people think $720 million US at that time was a lot of money, but a following article showed that actually they had another crypto wallet worth $2.6 billion of funds attained from ransomware. My point is these gangs have seemingly unlimited resources and now a lot of motivation to create the new forms of ransomware or DDoS bot networks that are soon to be primed from targeting each other to, again, being released into the dark web and cyber attacks for sale as a service. Someone brought up Uber. Well, on the dark web, you can actually rate how good these guys are, 1 to 5. 5, that ransomware was amazing. 1, not so good. Maybe I won't use them again. Yeah. So that's really interesting, right, for me. And then to Michael's point, in actual fact, for the first time in a long time, there was actually a ransomware decrease globally. 4% rising to 25% from Q1 to Q2. But if you look deeper into the statistics, although global ransomware attacks dropped by 4%, attacks on Russia increased by 13%. And so I guess they're very, very focused on this war right now, but it won't be forever.
Absolutely. How as we've sort of looked forward, how is that threat changing? How is the cybersecurity threat changing, and is it becoming more sophisticated than it was in the past? Maybe talk a little bit around that. Alex, maybe start with you.
Yeah, look, in New Zealand, we've had our fair share of attacks, obviously. We started a long time ago now, what seemed a long time ago in cybersecurity land, with our stock exchange being taken down for nearly a month, followed by, in the subsequent year, many of our banks and financial services industries being targeted. Then we moved on to ransomware attacks that have taken out our healthcare organizations, and that's all very scary stuff. And I guess it's brought cybersecurity front of mind with our boards, which is really, really important, because we need to be investing a lot more in this area, and we need to be learning from those lessons that we saw during these attacks.
I think it's hard to say that the threat landscape is getting any better. I mean, the geopolitical context we're living in has obviously deteriorated in the last years, and I think Alex made the point, and it's a really good one. These cyber criminal organisations that are attacking organisations for profit have been doing very well, which means they've acquired a lot of resources, so they can really ramp up their attacks, and they have a pretty sophisticated supply chain. So I think on the one hand, that's not unexpected. On the other, I think it's a different kind of threat, but the expectations on us that we're going to lift our cybersecurity posture are increasing. It's really hard to say now, with all the public attacks that we've had, that we aren't on notice about our need to do things. There's no guarantees in cybersecurity, but often when a breach becomes public for an organisation, what it reveals is some kind of failure to do consistently what you need to do for cybersecurity.
Yeah, and I think we had a conversation earlier, Michael. On top of all of those issues, we are really suffering with a lack of resource problem in New Zealand. We aren't bringing enough cybersecurity professionals into country, and whatever we are building up and developing often getting poached by Australia or other organizations, other countries. So I think it's important that we keep championing internships. We keep bringing on the new generation of young people that want to get into this industry. And diversification is really important. Having multi-cultures, having more women join cybersecurity is what I've been trying to champion for a while now.
Absolutely, absolutely. If we just think about a little bit in terms of, eventually it may happen to an organisation that they may have a cybersecurity breach. I mean, no one wants it to happen to them, but there is a chance. As business leaders and businesses, what do they need to think about how they maybe respond when that breach does happen? And I'd be quite interested if there's any sort of war stories or any examples of recent breaches or learnings you guys might be able to share.
Yeah, look, it's really important because it is possible to make an incident better or worse by how you respond to it. I think the communications aspects of cybersecurity are often underprepared for. There's a lot you can do in advance to prepare for an incident, but often, when the incident's happened, the time for preparation is over and you've got to respond. We've seen in some of the big public breaches in Australia recently, we've learned a couple of things. One is the way you communicate really needs to understand and empathise with the people who've been impacted. So if you talk about what happened to you as a business, that often lands very poorly with customers who have been potentially impacted. When you have a breach become public, usually the first thing your customers want to know was, am I impacted and what should I do? And for most organisations, that can be a really difficult question to answer because it takes time to analyse the breach and figure out what happened before you communicate with your customers. So having your spokespeople trained in cybersecurity and communications is really quite important.
Yeah, we actually recently ran a cybersecurity conference with more than 450 people attending, and it's fantastic considering we've only 6 months ago come out of COVID. But my key point was we actually had the CISO of one of our top 5 banks speak, and he actually said in front of this group of people, he said, look, I've trained my board to know we are going to get breached, and everybody went, yeah, and his point was it's not about when you get breached or if you get breached, is what happens and what does his team and his suppliers do after that breach. And in the world of cybersecurity, time is key. The more time you give that perpetrator, the more time you give that attacker, the more systems and applications they're able to take control and take over. It's okay if a little remote user from home or from anywhere gets compromised. It's worse if the network gets compromised, and it's terrible if the domain gets compromised and they remove all of your security products. So. That's probably the key message there. Yeah,
absolutely. So what about, what role do organisations and their customers have to play in handling security?
Look, given that 90% of New Zealand is in the SMB market, this means small companies with relatively low levels of cybersecurity resources. And so I think the role of the channel is really, really important. New Zealand has always been quite an outsourced society where the MSPs who are now converting to MSSPs, managed security service providers, become more and more important. It's been really key for Chilisoft to have championed the development of many security operations centres in New Zealand that can help these small companies. They have less resource, less financial resource and less people resource to deal with these attacks, and yet it's 90% of our economy. And so the important thing here is to keep fostering and building locally developed security operations centres that can help New Zealand SMBs.
Yeah, okay.
It's really interesting to think through, who is the customer. So there's examples where you've got a consumer. So banking sector will be a great example where banks do a really good job of their internal security, so attacks tend to be on their customers, which is why you have phishing around fraud. But if you think more of a business-to-business context, there's a real opportunity there for expectations to be mismatched between what a client business does and what a service provider business does. And there's a real challenge there around getting those expectations aligned. One of the ways I think we can do that is through incident response exercises. So actually working through a scenario where a cybersecurity event has happened and how would you respond often highlights gaps in those expectations and gaps in capability and possibly even gaps in the commercial construct between the client and its service provider. And better to be fixing those things through an exercise than after you're debriefing from an incident.
Yeah, and following on from what Michael said, look, a lot of SMBs and mid-market organizations are outsourcing now to the MSSPs, but they're starting to recognize that outsourcing isn't enough because we've got these great AI machine learning automation tools that are detecting these breaches. But at 2 a.m. in the morning, who are they going to call on a Sunday at the customer end to make that final decision? Now, that final decision may seem trivial when they might be asking, hey, can we take that machine that's been obviously compromised off the network, or shall we force re-authentication of that particular user? That might seem trivial, except if that machine happens to be the CEO's machine. You want to get that call right. And so that's really important to note that there still needs to be important collaboration and process between the end user and the outsource provider.
Yeah. Fantastic, and so much insight there and insight for New Zealand business leaders in terms of where they should invest or what they should be thinking about. I really thank you guys for your insight and your 20 plus years experience each in cybersecurity and bringing that and sharing that with our audience. And thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Pleasure. Nice.